Ready, we're going to bring on our guest speaker right now, Todd Hunt. Talk about that there Sirius right there. And hopefully one day his will look just like that. You going to paint it the same way? Cool. Turn around as you need to so you can see. Good idea. Well, Todd is a former Marine, as you may have read in the newsletter, and he's going to tell you more about himself and what he did in the Marines and those E-86Bs, was it? Prowlers, and that's kind of interesting. So I'm not going to waste a lot of time giving you a bio that you will hear directly from the horse's mouth anyway. But I know that with a project like this, he may not want to say, maybe he will, but anybody engaging in a project like this needs sponsors, needs money. So I'll just say it for him, if you can find it in your heart to help out. But he's going to be doing this for several years. So he may come back and give us a progress report at some point. And he may join us. He was with us at Flat Valley. I don't know if you saw him up there. And did you get a chance to meet Greg? Greg Anderson, yeah. Oh, he'd like to meet you before everybody goes home. So anyway, let's just bring up Todd Hunt and turn it over to him. You good? All right. Welcome.
Got my mic on. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Great. All right, well, let's see. The first thing I want to tell you is it's always bad to get the right after lunchtime slot for a briefing, so I apologize for that. I promise that I'll keep my briefing short, so 15 to 20 minutes or so. Hopefully you can make it to the end. And also, you mentioned I'm a Marine, which I also promise to at least use complete sentences so you guys can follow along. All right. I want to introduce my son. He's right here. His name is Peter. He's helping me on this project, so you might see a picture of him or one or two in this presentation. He told me recently that he wants to. He thinks he's decided to take ROTC in college, and he wants to fly jets in the Marine Corps. So after the show, please encourage him. Okay. All right, let's see if this works. All right, so quick little agenda here. I'm going to walk you through two parts of the presentation. First of all, I'm going to talk to you a little bit of history. Jerry hinted at the history that I'm going to talk about in the newsletter about something about Charles Lindbergh, and then I'll tell you about the project as a whole. We'll walk through a couple of stories that I think are pretty interesting on the trip. I've got those stories out of this book, which I encourage you to go read. It's called North to the Orient. It was written by Anne Lindbergh back in about 1935. She put this book out, which is a documentary on the trip I'm about to tell you about. So it's good reading. I recommend it. Then I'll roll into the project after that. So first I'll tell you a little bit more about me. Like Jerry said, I was a Marine officer. I was an NFO, a Naval Flight Officer, double anchor kind of guy. My job was electronic countermeasures officer in the EA-6B Prowler. So the Prowler's mission is to jam radars and keep the skies safe for you guys that are dropping bombs. And I did that I was in the Marines active for about 10 years, flying Prowlers, and then I did a short tour at the time in the reserve as well. Also, I've owned two airplanes. The first one on the upper right up there is a 1958 Piper Pacer that I bought in Portland, Oregon, and flew home to Annapolis, Maryland. Nice trip across the country. I did not do that on floats. I did it on wheels. I had the float shipped, and then I put it on floats to fly around the Chesapeake Bay. And I took some neat trips with that airplane, including a quick sortie around the Statue of Liberty at about 500 feet. That was a good time. And if you look real closely, there's Pete at age 2 in my arms there on the float. All right, the next picture is a 1929 Travel Air biplane. I bought that plane in 2000 with the intention of setting up a ride business in Monterey, California, and I found this airplane in Tampa, Florida, which is about as far away from Monterey, California as you can get. And so it was only 22 flights to get to California in that airplane. I do recommend it though. It's driving across the country in a Harley, you know, at 1,000 feet is a lot of fun. And I ran that business for a few months there. I refer to that time in my life now as my paycheck appreciation tour. And I came back to work for Lockheed Martin here in Denver, where I've been since then. So I think that's the bio on me. So now for the history. I think every time I talk to anybody about this project, my first question to people that ask is, well, what do you know about Charles Lindbergh? And they almost all say, well, he's the guy that flew from New York to Paris in the Spirit of St. Louis. And I said, you're right. And you know, that airplane is in the National Air and Space Museum. It's hanging right in the middle. It's a very central, iconic aircraft. But what I also find is that they don't know he has another aircraft in the National Air and Space Museum. He's got two. I don't know of anybody else that has two aircraft in NASM. That's a pretty good feat all by itself. The second airplane you see on the right there, you'll see some more pictures, is it was built by Lockheed in 1930, and it's called the Sirius, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. He did two things, two major trips he took in that airplane that were big deals at the time. It made national news, but I think most people have forgotten about that part of his history. The first trip is the trip that I'm going to talk about, the North to the Orient trip. And then the second trip, he left from New York again a few years later and flew all over Europe to Africa, across the South Atlantic to Brazil, and flew the Amazon River home. He put a total of 33,000 miles on that airplane before they donated it to the museum. So pretty interesting story. Let's see. So go on to the next chart. So this is a picture of the Sirius now sitting in the NASM. I'll tell you a few facts about it. It had three different engines. It started out with 450 horsepower. That one is 710. So he kept upgrading. He cruised at about 130 knots on floats and about 175 on reels. Incidentally, he set a transcontinental speed record with that airplane right after he picked it up from Lockheed in Burbank, California, and he flew it home to New York and set the record. So one of the things I want to convey to you is at the time that this airplane was built, these airplanes were the best in the world. Everybody that wanted to set a record in any kind of airplane, endurance, altitude, they were buying Lockheed aircraft back then. And, which reminds me, I brought another book just to point out there's a whole history on the Lockheed series of aircraft that they built at this time frame, and it's a really good read on lots of different history. Amelia Earhart flew a Lockheed Vega, same components as this airplane. That airplane's sitting right next to this one in the NASM, Amelia Earhart's Lockheed Vega. Let's see. This one would carry about 20 hours worth of gasoline and can fly about 2,000 miles on a fill-up. So some nice long legs for that airplane. Also, let's get another. Yeah, I'm pressing the button. It's whether Chris is in the way. That's the problem. There we go. So just another picture. He was flying the plane at this time to check it out right after they put it on floats. At this time, radio navigation was not existent. The only electronic equipment they had in that airplane was a state-of-the-art HF Morse code transmitter and receiver. When they would take off, Ann Lindbergh, who was flying in the back seat, she would crank out a 100-foot wire that trailed out the back of the airplane, and then she would send position reports with HF Morse code out of the back seat on every leg of the trip, telling people where they were and making position reports. So that's the only electronic equipment they had. He had an induction compass for heading in a rough chart to find where he was going the whole trip. There we go. All right, so now this chart just shows the first half of their trip. There's a concept, the shortest distance between 2 points on the globe is a great circle route. So guys like Joe Niemeyer here that fly transports all day, they know all about great circle routes, but us short-legged fighter guys don't know anything about that. In this case here, you'll see, you might ask, well, if you were flying from New York to China, why would you go over northern Canada? And that's because that's actually the short way. And So what you see here is all the different stops that they made in the first half of the trip up to Alaska. And it was interesting to note that he spent over a year making arrangements to ship fuel to these locations in order to have avgas there when he got there. In Canada, they borrowed fuel from the Canadian Air Force, but in many other places they had to actually have it shipped. Next chart is the second half of the route. You can see that from Alaska they left and went down the Russian island chain there, Kamchatka, and the Japanese island chain to Tokyo. There was a big reception at Tokyo. And then he flew, hit a couple spots in main Japan and then across to China. There's three stories I'm going to tell you about this half of the trip. And so just for your visual reference of where they are, the upper right-hand corner you see a little dot called the Shipmaref Inlet. I'm going to talk about that. And then Burriton Bay about halfway down. And then we'll talk about what happened when they got to China. So the story goes here that they left Barrow, Alaska, to fly to Nome. Nome was going to be their last stop in Alaska. And they had been flying in Canada and Alaska for a number of days, probably a couple weeks. And they didn't have to deal with the sun going down. In July and August in Alaska is the land of the midnight sun. The sun doesn't go down. So they didn't pay much attention to when dusk might be. And about halfway through this trip, they noticed that the sun was going down. And they may not make it to Nome as planned. And so right at dusk, they decided to sit down on this inlet. The sun was setting as it's getting dark really quickly, and so they land on the water and look at the shore, and there's no real safe place to beach the plane. So